Namaste and welcome to Live, Love, Engage. I am Gloria Grace Rand, your hostess and or host, I don't know, whatever. Anyway, I'm glad that you are joining us again on the podcast because today I have an awesome person that I'm going to be sharing with you and who's going to be really enlightening us about a subject that I have not touched on in the show, and one that I think a lot of people, including myself, don't necessarily understand fully. And it's about autism. And her name is Becca Lory, just Becca Lory, Becca Lory Hector, because that was
Becca Lory Hector, yeah.
Becca Lory Hector, okay. And she was diagnosed on the autism spectrum as an adult and has since become a dynamic autism advocate, consultant, speaker, and author. And with a focus on living an active, positive life, her work includes autism and neurodiversity consulting, public speaking engagements, and a monthly newsletter, as well as a weekly YouTube news show called Neurodiversity Newsstand. And if that's not enough, she's also assistant editor, feature writer for Spectrum Women magazine. So she has published multiple articles and books about life on the autism spectrum with the goal of spreading acceptance. And I forgot to mute my phone, so let me fix that right now. I apologize. Oh my goodness. Hopefully that didn't get picked up. But anyway, she wants to be able to spread acceptance, building understanding, and encouraging self-advocacy. So there's a lot more. She's got dual certifications as a certified autism specialist and cognitive specialist, and is just an all-around passionate woman. So I'm delighted to have you on Live, Love, Engage, Becca.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, I would like to, I guess, just start off with, the first question is, why are you so passionate about actually being an advocate, in particular for autistic adults?
Right. Because I am one. So that's part of it, right?
Right.
I was diagnosed with autism at the age of 36, which was 8 years ago. And I sort of went on a very personal journey about it. But from the beginning, I felt really strongly about paying it forward and giving back to a community that had helped me in a very important time in my life. And so on that journey, I ended up in nonprofit, and I ended up kind of just following my path of wherever it was going to take me, and helping other autistic adults navigate the world today has become my passion and purpose. We are missing services all over the place for autistic adults. And so if we don't have them right now, I'm going to make them. And so I did, because it's time.
That's awesome. So I know, like I said, I don't know a lot about autism. I would say probably what I've known is only from like watching shows on television, which is hardly a good way to get education about it, because I'm sure that it's probably misrepresented like crazy. What, can you maybe just give us a little bit of education for people maybe who even aren't familiar with autism at all?
Sure.
What is it, and why is it called like an autism spectrum in particular?
Right. Well, so there's a whole bunch that I could say about it, but first I want to start by just kind of busting a few myths about it, because most people, you're not, that unique. Most people's experience with autism, unless their life has been personally touched by it, the experience that you get and knowledge you get comes from the media, right? That's where we all get it from, right? And so for most of this time, the media has been representing autism with usually a savant type white male, right? And that's it, that's kind of the box. And so very recently, you guys have gotten some TV shows with some girls with autism, and there's been some changes, and you're seeing a few adults with autism, right? So it's changing from what it used to be, but it's still not a realistic portrayal. Of course, it's TV, right? We can do that. So what is autism? In its essence, I explain it as a filtering system. So basically we all have our own brains, and our brains process information, right? That's how we function in the world. It's how we make decisions. It's how we know we're hungry. It's how, it's how all of those things happen, right?
Yes.
Everything goes through our brains. And everybody in the world has, there are a majority of people that have this very basic communication system in their brain and the way the connections happen. And there are a handful of us that for whatever reason, we still don't know exactly, right? For whatever reason, our connections are a little bit different. Maybe it's a longer path, maybe it's a shorter path. Maybe it's an unrelated path and nobody gets it, right? Sometimes we get people who have sensory systems that they can smell color, right? And so there's all kinds of different ways the brain can make connections.
Right.
And so that's what defines sort of the autistic brain. And then the autistic experience of autism is a filtering system. Anytime I'm doing anything, even doing this interview right now, everything in my environment, everything we're talking about, everything I'm feeling in my body right now is being processed through the filter of autism, right? Because that's my brain. That's how my brain works, right? If I didn't have an autistic brain, it would process through whatever other filter I have, right? And so that's my filter. And what that means is that I filter out certain things that most people don't, and I can't filter out other things that most people can, right? And different experiences like that. And because the human brain is the human brain and is amazing, the spectrum can't be defined in one way. Every single individual with autism experiences it in a different way.
Wow.
So it's a human difference, and so it has variations beyond, right? And so what there are certain red flagger type system connections that we know are buzzwords, right? Things like sensory issues. We know about, and there's certain issues with sleep we know come with it, and there's some really like basic overriding things. But we're also finding out, shockingly, there's almost 50-50 men and women, and all this time we've not been looking for women or girls, right? And there's a real disparity in people of color and people who are in poverty not being able to be counted or formally diagnosed. It's not covered by insurance. So it's totally out of pocket. So is any therapies, because they don't exist for adults. So when we're talking about kids, that stuff gets covered because we've been talking about it as a kid syndrome for a very long time.
Right.
But when we get to the adult ages, even though it's a lifetime disorder, we don't have any coverage. And so it becomes in adulthood a question of money. Can I afford the $6,000 for a formal diagnosis? And if so, what am I getting for it? And if nothing, well, then why should I pay $6,000?
Yeah.
So we don't have an accurate number. We don't have any kind of accurate statistics. We have broad guesses. That's what we have right now.
Wow.
The CDC has been doing its best for a very long time, but they've been counting 8-year-olds. So anybody who was above 8 when they started counting wasn't counted. And so we don't have that. And so that's kind of autism in a nutshell. It's really that basic of a difference that because of its expression gets pointed out.
Oh my goodness.
And so that's really what it's about.
Wow. Well, that's enlightening for me because definitely totally, well, especially because I know there's organizations called Autism Speaks, and I know I have friends who are involved in that, but it has been more geared for children. So it is, but children grow up, and it's not like it's something that you grow out of necessarily. You just have to learn maybe different ways of handling things.
Right. We say you grow into your autism. That's how we say it, because you really do. You grow into your diagnosis. You grow in, just like you grow into adulthood.
Right.
You grow into it, right? You don't, as a kid, you can't accurately describe your needs or articulate what you want or your priorities, right? We don't have that skill set as a child. So it looks differently on kids than a really frustrated autistic adult who's having a meltdown. Doesn't look like the 4-year-old in the supermarket screaming and banging their head, because we've learned as adults different ways to cope with what we're dealing with, right? So it looks really different than the way it gets described. And then the other piece of it is the spectrum piece that you asked about, which is really the answer to that is, it's called a spectrum because there's no one of us that's the same, right? We all kind of have similarities, but we fall on this broad spectrum where two people on the spectrum can look so different, right? Like, most of my challenges are internal challenges. So most of what I deal with is struggles with sensory issues. I deal with interoception issues, which is the brain-body communication. I struggle with that a lot. I have something called alexithymia, which is a struggle to identify your emotions, right, and express them. And that's part of my struggle. And all of those things happen in here and in here, right? And I'm struggling, but I don't need necessarily anybody's help. And also nobody can tell that I'm struggling, right? And so it's an internal representation of my autism, right? And there are some folks for whom it's external, for whom they're fidgeting, for whom they're sensory issues, or they have dysgraphia, some coordination issues maybe, something that's more visible to the outside person, right? And that's more external facing autism, right? And so that person and me are going to look totally different from the outside, yet we're both struggling with the same thing, right? And so that's where we see that disparity. For a long time, it's still called a lot high functioning versus low functioning autism. But functionality labels really just do a disservice to everybody. Someone like me who will get classified as high functioning is seen as someone who needs no help and no support and no services, and I have no challenges, right? And on the other end is someone who needs a lot of external supports, but they have no voice. They don't think, they don't have an opinion, they can't write, they can't communicate. So they're dumb, and they have to deal with that struggle, right? And so because it doesn't describe what's really going on, whereas internal versus external clearly describes what the difference is. And so that's sort of where that spectrum piece comes in.
Wow. How did you come to even get diagnosed? What prompted you to seek that, especially since it wasn't even until just a few years ago?
It's an interesting story. It's kind of sad. I think now that I have lived through it, I look back, it's a little bit sad. But so for 36 years, I was living my life and being told that I was quote unquote normal, but I wasn't functioning normally. And everyone was always looking for the thing. What is it? What is it? Right. And so from a very young age, even in my baby books, where my mom was writing about my struggles and her struggles, you could see that it was there. So autism was there the whole time. The problem, I didn't just get it, didn't develop it, right? But at the same time, I was living in the late 70s, 80s is when I was being raised. We talked about autism only as the others, right? They went to another school, a different building, took a different bus. We don't want the cooties, it does, right? And that was the mentality that I grew up in. And so my mom was no way would she be looking for me for that, right? It wouldn't have in her head made any sense, right? And the same thing was happening with doctors and anybody who was seeing me. They were looking for autism meant little white boy who's starting up trouble in the classroom. That's what autism meant. And since I wasn't any of those things, I was speaking. I was a quiet, shy girl who read and didn't disturb the class, right? I was all of these things they weren't looking for. And so there I was struggling, and everybody's trying to figure out what it is. And I'm getting mislabels, a lot of negativity, a lot of she's dramatic, manipulative, stubborn, all of those kind of things. Got a lot of those labels, got some psychiatric labels in there. People tried borderline, schizophrenia, bipolar. And so I was, medicated for these things as a child. And obviously when you take medication that you don't need, it makes you feel worse. And so there was a lot of time I was feeling even worse than I needed to feel. And over that time, I stopped trusting doctors. I stopped trusting clinicians. I didn't trust adults in general, right? And by the time I got to 18, I wasn't going to see anybody anymore. I was done. And the irony of that is that when I turned 18, it was 1994. And that was the year that Asperger's syndrome came out in our companion. So just when I left school, there it was, right? And so I missed it, totally missed the boat. And I'm out in the world and I go to college and I do really well in college actually. And I was very happy in college. I was in my zone in college, graduated, got into law school, hated it and left. And to everybody's like, what? And I left because I had that distinct feeling. I looked at my neighbors. They did the thing. Look to your left and your right, and one of you isn't going to be here. And my thought was, please let it be me. I was like, please, I don't want to be here, right? And when I had that moment, it was like, oh man, I got to get out of here, right? And so I left and I went out into the world of work. which was uncomfortable as an autistic person, especially as an undiagnosed autistic person. The hidden social expectations in the workplace are unreal. And so what ended up happening to me is that in the next following like 15 years, I did 13 jobs, 13 different jobs, like no repeats in there. And I would do it for 3 or 4 months, pick up the skill set, no problem, all of a sudden get bored and pay attention to the social, and boom, quit, fired, something, gone. And so I lived a life of a cycle of like 4 months in a job, then I get depressed, then I go, right? And I would just cycle through this thing. So by 33, I was on that last job, and I remember the second it happened. It was in a meeting, and I decided I didn't want both weekend nights. It wasn't fair as a woman to be closing a bar both weekend nights, and I wanted one of the nights off. And in the middle of this meeting where I could tell that I wasn't going to get what I had asked for, I felt my brain crack. Like I literally was like, oh, and I know like my face just lost expression and everything. And I just walked out of the room and I left. And I never came back. And I went into my bedroom that I grew up in, into the bed in my mom's house, and I didn't get out for 3 years. So for 3 years, I was a suicidal person, completely housebound, no contacts with anybody, isolated entirely. I'd given up, but I didn't want to kill myself because my mom was there, and it was just she and I was an only child of a single mom. We only had each other, and the idea that she should find my body was like destroyed me. So I laid there dead but not dead for a really long time. Lots of plans, lots of ideations. And then all of a sudden my migraines started to change. And so I'd had them, we'd kind of been following them since I was 9 years old. And they always said, oh, if it changes, you know, come see us. Oh my God. Right. And so I all of a sudden got a smell preceding that migraine. And no one else could smell it. And that wasn't unusual to me. I often had sensory situations that other people didn't have, but it was frustrating. And so I started journaling, and I started doing all the things I'm supposed to do and be a responsible adult. But because I didn't leave the house, I didn't want to go to a doctor. So I went to WebMD and I started doing my research, right? Like a proper adult on a proper stage.
Self-diagnosed. There you go.
That's right. And so I'm looking, and sure, they have olfactory hallucinations and pituitary tumors and all these scary things. And I'm like, well, this is not for me. I'm going to Wikipedia. Clearly, I can't find the information. So onto Wikipedia I went, and into the vortex I go, clicking around, and round about halfway through, I got to sensory processing disorder. And I thought, oh, this is so incredibly familiar, right? I struggle with all of these things. I have my whole life. And at the bottom of it was Asperger's syndrome. And I'd never heard of Asperger's syndrome. The only thing I knew about autism is what we discussed, right? And so I freaked out a little bit, and I started reading it. And sure enough, I felt like I was reading my biography. And that was the moment for me. And I just took that link and I sent it to my mom an email. I told her nothing. I didn't want a biased opinion, and waited 3 days for her to read it. And then she came to me and said, you found it. Nobody else did it, but you found it. Like, where do you want to go? And that was such a validating moment. That was just the beginning of everything for me, going through that diagnosis. It changed everything. It saved my life. Most literally, autism saved my life.
Wow. That's awesome. That is an incredible story. And, but I am grateful that you were able to figure it out, because obviously you were meant to be here and to be a force for change and to be a force for good. And that's why you had to kind of get through that. So, you have accomplished so much. Oh, I mean, it was just, like I said, I didn't even read her whole bio, but there's so much. How do, as someone, well, I'm just going to say, I was just having a message with a friend of mine, and she was telling me all the things that she's doing. And I just felt oh my God, I haven't been doing anything lately. So it was like sort of this feeling like, oh my gosh. So, and yet I know that's not true. I know I'm getting things done, but I think a lot of us sometimes have those feelings. And so you're, I don't know, challenged with having sensory things, how does that even factor in on those days maybe where you don't even feel motivated to accomplish what do you want to get done? How do you
It's tough.
get going?
Yeah, I mean, I'm human. It's the same discomfort that we all feel when either we have an obligation that we really don't want to do, or we're too tired to do, but we have to. I mean, it's the same. We all know that feeling, right?
Yeah.
It's just that what makes me get to that point is different for me than what it is for most people. So like we talk about in the autism world, we stole from the chronic pain world. They have this great theory called spoon theory in the chronic pain world, where they talk about how in the morning you are given 20 spoons to do your day, right? Your whole day.
Okay.
You can't recharge them. You can't get them back. You can borrow from the next day. But if you borrow from the next day, that means you're starting out with less the next day, right?
Yeah.
So that's spoon theory. And as an autistic person, there are some self-care activities that are a little bit more difficult for me. For example, my least favorite self-care activity is a shower. There's a lot of executive function that has to happen in the shower. You have to remember all the things you have to do while you're in there, right? It's also a crazy sensory experience for me. I'm very sensitive to the water pressure, the smells in there, all of that stuff. I hate being wet and cold when I come out. It's very painful for me. And it's like all of that stuff is part of a shower, right? It's not just get in, get clean. Right. And so for me, that say it takes the average person 1 spoon. For me, it takes 3. Right. And so if it's a shower day, I have to plan accordingly. That means I know I've committed to that. That's minus 3 spoons from my 20 already. Right. Yeah. And so that's the difference between, in the motivation piece. There's also something we call autistic inertia, which is probably going to sound familiar. It's just, I think we give it a name because it's excessive and very common for folks on the spectrum. But I think it's a human condition. It's that thing when you're stuck on the couch and you're comfy, but you know you have a million things to do and you want to do them.
Yes.
That effort to get off the couch just isn't happening.
Yes.
Right? And the day's going and you're 5 more minutes, 10 more minutes, right? But you're not moving off the couch. Right. And that's what we call autistic inertia. Many of us push ourselves to being so tired and past our spoons for so long that we crash. And that little crash, sometimes we call it a shutdown. And sometimes if it's really bad, we call it burnout. It can go for months for us. But what happens as a result is this thing called autistic inertia. It can also be caused by depression if your depression kicks in, or anxiety if anxiety kicks in. If you've had a really sensory high day the day before, it can kick in the next day, right? Any kind of strain that excess strain that you're putting on your system, right? And it just feels like that I can't get off the couch. And the thing that I tell all autistics is you can't avoid that. You are going to have days of inertia. Right. The trick is, how are you going to handle it? How are you going to plan for it? What's your plan while you're in it? What's your plan to get out of it? Not avoiding it, because you can't entirely, but having a plan throughout it. Right. And so what we do, we keep really good track of our spoons. We make sure that we understand that they are the most valuable thing that we possess and that we can't give them away willy-nilly to other people. Right. And all of that stuff. And you get selfish about your spoons, and you should be. All humans should be selfish about their spoons. Yeah. You get there and you're on the couch because you just screwed up once. Or an activity you thought was going to be a 4-spooner ended up being a 6-spooner. Whatever happened. And there you are in the inertia. Right. And so part of it is give into it and be kind to yourself. If your body and your brain are telling you need that day, by God, take it. Right? Exactly. Don't argue with it. Take it, but truly take it. Don't go check your email. Don't truly take it and mean it. Yeah. Right? Take that day. You can cancel your plans, let people know you're not feeling well, something unexpected happened. You don't have to explain that you can't get off the couch. Right? Just reschedule with somebody and move on. If there's stuff that you have to do, that's going to be a planning day, right? That's a lot about, okay, well, do I need to shower to do this thing? Can I get away with not so I don't waste those spoons? What else can I ditch? What else can I, right? And to leave yourself just with the have-tos, right? And then I think if you stay in that inertia place for too long, it will turn into a depression and it will become a shutdown and a burnout. Right. So I always say to people, when you're wanting to get off the couch and you genuinely want to in here, but you just can't motivate yourself, you need to motivate yourself with something small and simple. And it's really easy. Like, I'm somebody who says, I can't function in my house and I don't feel well about myself if my house is dirty. So if I can't get off the couch to do something big, I'll get up to do the dishes or start a laundry.
Right.
Or, right, something that I know, at least I'm doing something. I'm not, right? And oftentimes that's the kick you need. You'll start the laundry, then you'll do the dishes, then all of a sudden you're doing, right? So that's one trick. And the other trick is to look for something to create, right? If it's bake cookies or make a painting or dye your hair or put on makeup, do something creative that takes doing, right? That sends like signals to the rest of your body that you're ready to get off the couch now. Like, this is happening. And that will kick you out of that space. But it's the knowledge that you need to get kicked out of that space, right? That is what we really need to work on, not avoiding the days that they happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that advice is spot on for anybody, whether you've got autism or not, because I've definitely been there. And some days it's like, yeah, I've just had to just give myself the grace to say, you know what, I'm taking this day off. And because fighting it just makes it worse. And then you just.
It worse. And it means the next day you're also going to be crappy. And the day after, and right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It means you can't show up to anything well. And frankly, if I have a meeting with you and you're not going to show up to it well, I would rather reschedule, right?
Right, yeah.
So would the rest of the people in your life. They don't want half you if you don't feel good. They'd rather you take care of you. But we do that guilt thing. Oh, they're not going to like me if I, right? Or I'm not good enough if I, and that's our own garbage. So remember that and not put it on somebody else, right? And that's that catch-all of like changing your self-talk and all of those things, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I understand that you have a personal development course that you've designed for autistic adults. Can you tell us what that is about and why, and what kind of benefit they would get from it?
Sure. Well, one of the things that I experienced as someone who went through an adult diagnosis is the lack of what now services, supports, information. So there was a lot of books and memoirs from other autistic people who talked about their life experiences leading up to their diagnosis in the same way, right? And those were very reassuring to know that I wasn't alone and to hear voices of other autistics. But they always ended with their diagnosis. And it was like, well, but I have one now, and right? Like, what now? Like, what can it do for me? What's the point? Like, somebody, you know, next steps. And it didn't exist. It doesn't exist, right? And part of that is that all funding and research is going to 21 and below and all of these other parts and politics of our community. Well, I don't care about parts and politics of our community. I don't, because that's not changing my life. And it's not helping, you know, in the now, it's not helping the folks that are alive now and are struggling.
Exactly.
Right. And I appreciate the research that's being done. I am a supporter. I go to the meetings. I participate in all of it. But I know that's for the next generation. Like, that stuff is going to impact people that are younger than me. I'm doing it for them. But what can I do for the me's? What can I do for folks that are getting late diagnoses now and they want their life to be different? So many of us that, you know, end up either because their children get diagnosed, then they get diagnosed, which is really common. And the other one is that people are in a mental health crisis of some sort and the autism comes up, right? At an adulthood. That's when we find it. So what we're often looking at is people who are late in life diagnosed, who have lived an entire life doing all of the supposed to's and the shoulds to make everybody in their life happy because everybody was telling them that's what they needed and they just did it. And they have any instincts that they have always been corrected and changed, right? None of their behavior is considered normal. So you stop listening to your own inner voice, your wants and needs disappear, your joy disappears, right? But this is what it's supposed to be. This is what adulthood is, right? That's what we're told. So I have a lot of autistic adults. They've lived that to like 20s, 30s, 40s, right? I have one client in her 70s, okay? And that's what we're talking about. And these people have been living somebody else's life. For most of their life, and they are unhappy, but the idea that it could be different has never occurred to them. The idea that it doesn't have to be that way, no one's ever told them that. No one's ever taught them how for it to be different. No one's ever given them enough validation about their experiences, their reality, their wants, needs, their inner gut nobody's ever just said all of that stuff is good. Like, it's okay for you to listen to those things, especially in adulthood. You're not 4 anymore. You have a life history. You know now, right? And so what I teach is a course that is to take people from that survival mode, and I call it white knuckle survival mode, because autistics do. We take the 40-hour-a-week job because supposed to. We get married, supposed to, have children, supposed to, house, supposed to, don't know how to run our finances, children upset our sensory needs, never wanted them anyway, right? There are all these little things that are happening in these people's lives. Now they get a diagnosis that blows their brain away. Like, how did I live on this planet and nobody knew this whole time? And now what? So you like get delivered this information that's life-changing, and then no one tells you what to do with it. So what I want to do is teach them that they don't have to settle for survival. There's a choice beyond that. There's a way out. There's a way to take apart your life and rebuild it in a way that honors your autism, that honors your selfhood, that honors your authenticness, and you can live your best life. Now, the trick to it is it's not going to look like what everyone else tells you it should look like. And you have to get past the point of caring that people, right, will make judgment. And that's the people that I work with. So I walk them through those mindset changes. I give them the tools they need to kind of set their goals, decide where they want to focus on in their life, where they want to make the changes, right? And then walk them through how to maintain that. How do you maintain that over the course of time? Because the goal, of course, and I teach it to them the whole time, is that these cycles run through all the time. You're not finished with it once, and no, you're going to keep growing, evolving, and changing. So you will keep doing this. But if you keep doing it, your life will always look to you the way you want it to. It'll always feel in alignment with yourself. And that's an option that nobody's given autistic adults yet. And I only know it works because I just did it. I just walked through it. And all I had available to me were all the personal development tools that everybody else does. 4 agreements, the secret that's not a secret, right? We all of those things. And I read them, but I have an autistic brain and it picks up patterns. So I saw all the repetition. I saw different words but the same message, right? Over and over again. And I took those repeated messages and I expressed them in a way that the autistic brain understands it. I do a personal development course with the meat and not the potatoes. We just are in it for the guts. Because that's how the autistic brain works. I don't need the lovely stories that surround it, right? And so that's what I'm producing. That's what I'm giving folks right now.
That's awesome. So do you do that? Is it like a group program or how?
Well, it's sort of just coming into existence. I'm excited because it was one of my back burner projects that COVID gave life to. Right? My entire speaking calendar got canceled and I had time to do my baby project. And I did. And this is one that I've been working on for the last couple of years in bits and pieces as I could. And then I had the time to make it come to life. And now it's out. So how I'm running it is I've broken it down into 3 units. I've broken it down into that because it's digestible, but also then I can make it affordable for my autistics. We have an 85% unemployment rate currently. And so asking people who are unemployed for money, but also need the help to make the change. Pain in the butt. So I get sponsors that help me give out scholarship seats for those folks, but I also broke it down into sizable chunks. Unit 1 already came out. So what I'm doing is doing them live, and I'm doing a live Q&A following for that one recording session. And then afterwards, the replay is available for purchase. And then what I may re-record them or whatever. After the 3rd unit is out, they'll be available all together. People can do them all at once. They can do them whatever format they want to do them. And they get worksheets with it, and they get a group coaching call, and there's other things that come with just the course. And so I'm walking through it, and it's exciting. It's vulnerable to be sharing like my baby project. You know, it was okay when it was on the back burner because I was excited, and now it's out here for touching and looking at. And so it's a little bit of a vulnerable baby thing. But I'm proud of it, and I'm excited to just be offering an option to give everybody something. It may not be for everyone, but at least there's something, right? At least it's not the void, and it shows people that we can create our own support.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, congratulations. That is a very big deal because I know putting together courses and things like that is not easy. So Good for you. And because that was something I was actually going to ask you about too, is like, how have you been, handling the pandemic and what have you been up to? But now we know. So that's good.
Yeah. I mean, it was part of the whole idea. It was, I didn't want to get stuck on the couch. I know it's a pandemic, but I still don't want to be a lump, because that's what happens to me in the winter with seasonal depression. And now is the summer. I don't want to, no, you can't have my time. And so I didn't want to give it up. And so I said, I need to create something. And so I took my own advice and I created, and it felt wonderful, and it feels wonderful too, in the middle of all this negativity, to have put something out there. And it's definitely kept me off the couch.
Very good. I'm glad. Yeah. It's interesting. I've been, really doing this podcast during the pandemic as part of I have my other work that I do, but I've really been embracing this. And even for a while, I was doing like 2 interviews a week and posting them. And it's the highlight of my day, because it's just, I really love meeting interesting people like yourself and being able to share that. And it's so gratifying. And so,
and it keeps you off the couch. It keeps your brain going. It keeps you feeling like you're human, right? You're still connecting with people. It's all of that good stuff. And that's what we need to do, And so you live by example. That's what I tell people, right? Yeah, I know I created this course. What do you want to do during your quarantine?
That's
right. What'd you do? How clean is your house? Like, right? Right?
Yeah, exactly. Actually, house is okay. It's my office. That needs a little work, but it's all right. It's coming along. If someone wants to be able to, first thing I want to ask is, how can someone maybe get involved in maybe even just supporting you, supporting autism, like being an autism advocate and something? Do you have like an organization that you work with?
Yeah, I mean, I have some. Our community is filled with some of the most amazing people, and that's part of the gift of autism for me, is my community. And I am happy to tout all about all the people in my community all the time. So yay, cheer us on. So we have some amazing folks and some great organizations. Depending on where you are in the country is going to depend a lot on the availability of services and also these organizations. Because of high population, East Coast, West Coast, best services, right? I mean, that's just the way that it is. In the middle of the country, less so, right? So if in particular for adults, if you're looking for diagnosis, services, supports, answers to questions, you may have to look outside of your area. You might have to look into the bigger cities and things like that. But you want to, trust me. If you go to get a diagnosis, you want a clinician that has diagnosed adults previously, and has experience with adults, because you don't want someone who's just testing for kids. We look different and they won't see it. And then if you are particularly a female on the spectrum as an adult, you also want to look for someone with experience with women, because we also present differently than men. So it's going to be a little bit of a search right now. We don't have a national hotline yet. We don't have any federal support or any organization that you can call right now. And so you're going to have to do a little bit of research. Some of the better organizations are Autism Society. They have chapters across the United States, so that's a pretty good call. They may know someone in your area if you need them, and they'll know local resources and that kind of thing. The other one that I really recommend, if you're on the East Coast, I recommend AANE. It's the Asperger's Autism Network of New England, some big long acronym, but they're New England based. They've just taken over also the New York City area, so they're nice and big. They should have a selection of things. They're one of the better organizations in terms of resources. I also recommend, if you genuinely want to support the autistic population, to support the organization, the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network. So it's ASAN. They are fantastic. It is entirely autistically run. So it's all their employees are autistic, and they support the community from the point of view of the stakeholder. So from the autistic perspective, a lot of the other organizations came to be in our early stages. So they're very parent focused and very kid focused. And that's okay, but it's time for that to change, right? We have a large vocal adult population. It's time for us to get services. And we also are making more autistic children. And so it would be nice for you to take care of us.
Yeah.
And so
Right.
that's, I struggle with some organizations because they are children focused, because they have a history, whatever. But the ones right now, I mean, if you genuinely say, you know what, I have $50 to share with the community and I'd like to support the autism community, give it to the Autism Self-Advocacy Network. Their work is genuinely reaching actually autistic people now. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, I'll make sure that I'll put a link to that in the show notes so that make it easy for people to be able to do that. And then what about if someone wants to be able to find out more about your course? What would be the best way to get in touch with you?
Very, very anal retentive. And so everything is on my website because I need to know it's there. And so it's there. So the Self-Defined Living is the name of the whole course. It's called A Path to a Quality Autistic Life. And that has its own tab on my website, which is Becca Lory, LORY.com. And I also have a sponsors page there, so you can see my sponsors or become a sponsor if you want to donate some seats to my class. And then everything else is on there too, all my social media, all my writing, my YouTube channel, my newsletter you can sign up for there. All of that stuff is just in one place for you. And you can even reach out to me from there directly, so you can use the contact page.
Awesome. Well, I thank you so much for being here. You are a lovely woman and just with an incredible energy and drive. And I'm proud to have met you and gotten to know you. And I wish you all the success in the world with helping to really get more adults to get them the support that they need. So I'm very glad.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to a non-autism community. I'm trying very hard to step out of my comfort zone and get out of just the autism podcast, because I know that folks like you really want to learn. And if we give people the opportunity to hear it, they want to listen. It's just the opportunities aren't so easy. So I'm trying to make it a little easier.
Oh, good. Awesome. Well, I appreciate that. And thank you again for taking time out of your schedule to talk with us today.
My pleasure.
And for everyone who is listening and watching, I also want to just thank you for continuing to do that and to be a supporter of this podcast. I really appreciate you. And in closing, I'll just tell you my wish for you is to just go out there and to live fully and love deeply and engage authentically.